Underneath the amber glow of worn-out bar lights in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, Emily Hartman sat alone, swirling a half-empty glass of whiskey that had long gone warm. The air smelled of pine wood, leather, and the ghost of something lost. It was the kind of place where stories died slow, and where people came when they had no one left to lie to, not even themselves. She was the kind of woman who used to laugh without hesitation, whose loyalty ran deeper than blood. But tonight, her world had fractured, and all because of the man who once vowed to cherish her for life. His name was Nathan Hartman, corporate law consultant by day, and as Emily had just discovered, a shameless adulterer by night. 3 days ago, she was his wife. 3 days ago, she was living in ignorance. Now, she was staring down the barrel of truth with a quiet, boiling rage that didn't scream. It seethed. The discovery wasn't cinematic. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation with lipstick on a collar or an errant perfume trail. It was a text. A stupid, predictable, half-assed text that popped up on his smartwatch while he was sleeping beside her. "Same room as last time, baby. Can't wait." Followed by a heart emoji. She stared at the screen for minutes, hoping, praying it was a joke. That maybe it was a misunderstanding. But when she opened his phone and saw the rest of the messages, the hundreds of them, the images, the videos, the voice notes, there was no mistaking what he had done, what he had been doing. For months. Celeste. Her name was Celeste, and she wasn't just a mistress. She was someone Nathan planned his weekends around. A woman he booked luxury suites for in Santa Fe while Emily stayed home, folding his laundry, managing their accounts, building his dreams. And that was the real betrayal. Not the sex, but the planning, the investment, the emotional treason. Emily hadn't cried, not immediately. Instead, she'd felt something far worse. A hollowing, as if someone had scraped the marrow from her bones and left her a living shell. She had walked out of the house that morning like a ghost, only realizing she hadn't eaten, or spoken in hours when her vision blurred from dehydration. Now here she was, 3 days later, sitting at a bar called the Silver Hitching Post, watching ice melt into her drink, thinking about how ridiculous it was to still love someone who could carve you open and not blink. She didn't come here to talk. She came here to forget. But forgetting never comes when you ask for it. "Is this seat taken?" The voice came from her right, smooth, rich, and touched with a southern drawl. She glanced up. There he stood, tall, weathered, like a cowboy left behind by time itself. Faded jeans, dust-coated boots, a long coat that almost touched the floor, and a Stetson hat that should have looked ridiculous in modern-day Wyoming, but somehow didn't. His jaw was sharp, covered in a light stubble, and his eyes were a strange kind of gray, the kind that made you feel seen. Not watched. Seen. Emily blinked, caught off guard. He smiled, not wide, just enough. "Name's Boone. Justice Boone," he said, holding out a hand as he settled onto the stool beside her without waiting for permission. Justice. The irony nearly made her laugh, or cry. She wasn't sure which anymore. "Emily," she said quietly. "That's a strong name," he said. "You look like someone who's just found out their world was a lie." She stiffened. "Excuse me?" Didn't mean nothing by it. Just an observation. "You always this invasive with strangers? Only when they're sitting in my favorite seat, drinking pain in a glass." Emily gave a dry chuckle despite herself. "You talk like you walked out of a Clint Eastwood movie." He smiled again. "I get that a lot." They fell into a strange, uneasy silence. Emily didn't want to talk, but something about him, this man who felt so out of place yet so rooted in the moment, kept her grounded. He gestured to the bartender. "I'll take a whiskey, and whatever she's having, if she doesn't mind." Emily shrugged. Suit yourself. A moment passed. So, Justice said, taking a sip. How long were you married before he started putting someone else first? Emily didn't ask how he knew. Somehow it felt like he already knew everything, like he'd been waiting for her. 7 years, she said. Met him in grad school. Thought he was the love of my life. Justice tilted his head. You thought, wrong. I see that now. He leave, or did he do the worst thing, stay and demand you live with it? Emily turned sharply. What did you just say? Justice didn't flinch. Men like Nathan. They don't always leave. Sometimes they stay and twist the knife slow. Make you feel like you're overreacting. Like it's your job to forgive. Like loyalty is a leash, not a virtue. Her heart skipped. How do you know his name? I know a lot more than that, he said quietly. A cold shiver ran down her spine. What are you? Some kind of private investigator? Justice took out a cigarette, a hand-rolled kind that smelled faintly of cedar and spice. He didn't answer. Instead, he leaned forward. I help people, he said, his voice low, serious now. People like you. People who gave everything and got betrayal in return. I don't promise closure. I don't promise healing. But I offer something else. Emily felt her skin prickle. Which is? Reckoning. She stared at him. You mean revenge? He shook his head. No. Revenge is messy, emotional. Reckoning is something else. It's clean. It's just... The words settled between them like a dropped stone. I don't want to hurt him, Emily whispered. I want to be free. Justice nodded. Then you're already halfway there. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small silver locket. He set it on the counter between them. This belonged to someone who refused to die in silence, he said. Wear it. If you decide you want answers, real ones, you'll find me again. And with that, he tipped his hat, left a $20 bill, and walked out of the bar like he'd never been there. Emily stared after him, pulse racing. When she looked down at the locket, her fingers trembled. On the back was an engraving. To E.H., when the time comes, remember who you are. Her initials. She hadn't told him her last name. She didn't sleep that night. The next morning, she returned home to find Nathan casually making coffee like nothing had happened. He greeted her with a kiss on the cheek and a smile, the kind of smile that used to melt her. Now it made her nauseous. She watched him, watched the way he moved, watched the ease of his deception. And suddenly, Emily knew something for certain. He thought he'd won, but he had no idea what was coming. If you're still with me, this is just the beginning of Emily Hartman's story. A story that bends the line between heartbreak and reckoning, between what's deserved and what's necessary. And trust me, you haven't seen anything yet. If you're hooked and want to hear the rest of Emily's journey, make sure to subscribe to this channel. Your support means everything, and it helps us keep bringing you more stories that cut deep and stay with you long after the last word. Now, before you go, here's a little question for you. If you were in Emily's shoes, what would you do first? A. Confront Nathan directly and demand the truth. B. Quietly gather evidence and prepare a plan. Let me know in the comments. Just drop A or B below. I'm curious to see where you stand. 3 days after the encounter with Justice Boone, Emily Hartman stood in the doorway of her quiet home in Jackson Hole, staring at the life she no longer recognized. The same walls, the same furniture, the same scent of pine wood cleaner and cologne lingering faintly in the air. But everything had changed. And the strangest part was, Nathan Hartman acted as if nothing had happened. He moved around the house with a breezy arrogance, humming while he made espresso, tapping on his phone with that half-smile he reserved for people he didn't respect. Emily knew now. She had been one of them. A fixture. A convenience. Something to keep clean and functional while he sought out pleasure elsewhere. She had said nothing so far. Not a word about the text, the photos, or the messages she had read with trembling hands. Her silence wasn't acceptance. It was calculation. Nathan had always underestimated her. The day after the bar, after Justice handed her the silver locket, Emily called in sick. Not because she couldn't work, but because she had something far more important to do. She sat on the bedroom floor, laptop open, phone beside her, digging through digital fragments of a life that no longer belonged to her. She'd spent the past 5 years managing Nathan's calendar, doing their taxes, even organizing his legal briefs when his assistant was overwhelmed. She knew his passwords, his cloud logins, his filing system. She'd always thought of that as intimacy. Now she saw it for what it was, access, and she used it. What she found was beyond infidelity. This wasn't a one-time affair. It wasn't even a double life. It was a pattern, a lifestyle, an orchestrated campaign of betrayal that stretched back almost 2 years. Flights booked to San Francisco, Las Vegas, Santa Fe. Hotel confirmations. Restaurant receipts, Uber logs. A hidden folder in his private Google Drive labeled simply, Memories. Inside were dozens of subfolders, each one titled with a woman's name. Celeste was just one. There were others. Harper, Renee, Laurel, Vanessa. Hundreds of photos, some graphic, others intimate in a way that told her what she had feared the most. He gave pieces of himself to these women that he never offered her. The way he touched their hair, the way he smiled in those candid shots, even the way he held hands, carefree, unburdened. She remembered sitting across from him at dinner 2 months ago when she reached for his hand and he subtly pulled away. Now she understood. He wasn't empty because of work stress. He was full, just not with her. She found voice memos, too. Small moments he recorded for himself or for them. Messages like, "Can't stop thinking about last night," or, "Next time we're in Santa Fe, let's do that rooftop suite again." One of them was from Celeste. Her voice was light, girlish. "Missed you already, babe. Hope your wife doesn't get too suspicious." Emily didn't cry. She didn't scream. Her hands didn't shake. Her pulse didn't rise. She felt nothing. Or maybe not nothing. Something different. A kind of steel layering her heart, click by click. She was no longer hurt. She was no longer mourning the man she thought she married. She was preparing for war. And yet, in the quiet moments, between each discovery, a strange image kept appearing in her mind. Justice Boone's eyes. Not because she believed in magic, or in ghosts, or in strange old men who showed up at bars with otherworldly wisdom, but because he had known something about her. Something buried, something ancient, something sacred. And more than anything, she wanted to feel sacred again. The next evening, Emily followed her husband downtown. She told him she had a late meeting with a client. He nodded, distracted, already absorbed in whatever lie he had lined up. She waited in her car 3 blocks, away from his office. An hour later, she saw him exit the building with a woman. Tall, brunette, and unmistakably Celeste. They walked together to a nearby cafe, talking close, her hand slipping into his coat pocket like it belonged there. Emily followed them. They weren't careful. Nathan had never needed to be. Emily was supposed to be at work, or home, or at yoga. Never here. Never watching. Inside the cafe, she sat at a corner table, watching them through a reflection in the mirror behind the bar. She didn't flinch, didn't blink, just listened. They talked about Paris, about renting a place in Montmartre for the summer, about how Nathan would figure out the logistics with Emily, and how it would all be easier once the papers are filed. Papers? Emily clenched her jaw. She hadn't received any papers. He was planning to leave, but on his own timeline, under his own terms. And worse, he was crafting a narrative that would make her the villain. She could hear it in his tone, the careful weaving of half-truths and insinuations. Emily's been distant. She's changed. She doesn't support my career the way she used to. He was rewriting the story of their marriage, and he was casting himself as the wounded party. But Emily was done being a prop. That night, she returned home early, hours before Nathan. She waited on the porch, locket in hand, wearing a sweatshirt that still smelled like his cologne from better days. When he pulled into the driveway, he looked startled. "You're home," he said. "Yeah, I thought I'd cook." He blinked, unsure. "Everything okay?" Emily smiled. "Perfect." That night she made his favorite meal, filet mignon, truffle potatoes, charred asparagus. They opened a bottle of wine from their honeymoon in Italy. She told stories, laughed, played the part of the loving wife. And all the while, inside, she was pulling further and further away from the woman who once would have begged for his affection. After dinner, Nathan reached for her waist and tried to pull her close. Emily stepped back. "Not tonight," she said softly. "I'm tired." He gave a small, indulgent nod, as if to say, "It's okay, I have options." When he fell asleep, Emily rose quietly and walked outside. The stars in Jackson Hole were breathtaking that night. And somewhere between the weight of betrayal and the stillness of the earth, Emily made a decision. She wasn't going to leave in shame. She wasn't going to plead or cry or let him spin his version of their story to everyone they knew. She was going to end this marriage on her terms. She was going to make sure Nathan Hartman never forgot the day he underestimated her. As she sat on the porch swing, the locket heavy in her hand, she whispered a single sentence into the dark. "I'm ready." The next morning, she called her lawyer. Not to file for divorce, not yet. First, she wanted to know what leverage she had, what legal options, what financial routes. The attorney, a blunt, no-nonsense woman named Teresa Grant, reviewed Emily's findings. "This isn't just a case of adultery," Teresa said. "This is deliberate fraud. Hidden assets, too, I'd bet. If we play this right, we hit him hard." Emily asked what she would need to prove it. Teresa leaned forward. "Let him believe he's in control. Let him keep digging his own grave. Meanwhile, we document every purchase, every rendezvous, every lie. Then, when he least expects it, we drop everything. And if he tries to twist the story, you'll have a narrative he can't refute." Emily stood, feeling taller than she had in months. That night, she went to bed before Nathan. And as she lay under the same sheets they used to make love beneath, she stared at the ceiling, wondering not whether Justice Boone was real, but how he had found her at the exact moment she needed to be found. And just like that, her phone buzzed. A message. "No number. Time to write your ending. JB." No reply, just a calm, knowing breath. For the first time in weeks, Emily Hartman slept without dreams. The storm didn't come with thunder or rain. It arrived in the stillness, in the quiet before dawn when everything else was asleep. Emily Hartman woke before the sun, her body already alert, her mind razor sharp. For weeks now, she'd lived between two lives, the one Nathan still believed in, and the one she was building in secret. He had no idea that every word, every movement, every lie was being recorded, cataloged, prepared. Emily had gathered screenshots, transaction histories, even surveillance footage she requested from the boutique hotel near the Tetons, where he took Celeste 3 Fridays in a row. Her attorney, Teresa Grant, had compiled it into a file labeled, simply, Exit Plan. But something deeper was stirring inside her. The facts were there, the legal route was forming, but none of it felt whole. Not yet. There was something unresolved that lived not in the documents, but in the marrow of her bones. It was more than just justice. It was reclamation, and she needed help with that kind of work. The morning after assembling her final file, Emily drove without direction. Her hands guided the steering wheel, but her thoughts drifted elsewhere, toward the bar, toward the man with fire in his eyes and dust on his boots. She didn't know if he was real, but if he was, she needed to see him again. By early afternoon, she found herself at the edge of the woods just outside Jackson Hole, where the evergreens stood like silent sentries. There was a narrow trail that disappeared into the forest. She didn't remember ever seeing it before, yet it felt familiar. She parked the car, grabbed her coat, and walked. For nearly an hour, Emily climbed the slope, her breath frosting in the air, boots crunching against fallen needles and earth. Just as she began to question her instinct, she saw it. A small cabin, tucked between two pines, smoke curling softly from the chimney. It was waiting for her. She knocked, but no one answered. The door creaked open with a gentle push. Inside, the warmth of a fire greeted her, and a kettle steamed on the stove. The space was filled with relics from another era. A Winchester rifle mounted above the hearth, shelves of worn books, a framed photo of a Civil War soldier beside a woman with a lace collar. On a wooden table sat a tin box, the same locket Justice had given her. Only now it was open, glowing faintly from within. "You came," a voice said behind her. Emily turned. There he was, Justice Boone. Same long coat, same steely gaze, but something about him looked different now. Less spectral, more rooted. Like this was his home, and she had finally arrived. "I didn't know if I was supposed to," she said. "You were," he replied, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "Not everyone hears the call. Even fewer follow it." Emily exhaled. "Why me?" Justice studied her for a moment. "Because you were born to remember who you are, and to make a choice most people are too afraid to face." She sat in the chair near the fire, watching the flames flicker. "I have evidence. I have the law on my side. I'll win." "You'll win on paper," he said. "But that's not the reckoning you're really after." Emily stared into the fire. "Then what is it?" He pulled a chair across from her and sat down. "You want more than to be right. You want to be whole again. To stand in a room with the person who shattered you and no longer feel the break." Her eyes burned. "Is that even possible?" Justice leaned forward. "With the right plan, yes. But it has to come from your center, from the place where your truth has been buried by someone else's lies." Emily didn't speak. She couldn't. He reached behind him and pulled out a leather-bound journal, its cover cracked from age. He handed it to her. "Write down what he took," he said, "but also write what he couldn't." Emily opened the journal. The pages were blank. She stared at them as if they were holy. Then, she picked up the pen resting beside it and began. It started slowly, my safety, my peace, my trust. But as the minutes passed, her hand moved faster. My ability to laugh without suspicion, my self-worth, my sense of being enough. Then a shift. The tone deepened. What he couldn't take, my intuition, my strength, my intelligence, my capacity to love deeper than he could ever imagine, my future. When she finally stopped writing, the room was quiet. Justice hadn't moved. He didn't have to. "You're almost ready," he said. "For what?" "To show him who you've become." Emily closed the journal and exhaled. "Then let's begin." That night she invited Nathan to dinner. She cooked again, another favorite. But this time the wine was decoy. She remained sharp, composed. He sat across from her, distracted by his phone. She watched him closely, calculating every breath, "Was thinking," she said calmly, "maybe we should have a dinner with some of your colleagues next weekend, at the house." Nathan looked up, surprised. "Really? You've never been big on the work crowd." "I think it's time I change that." He smiled, cautious but intrigued. "Well, all right." Emily smiled back. It was the smile of a woman, with an ocean of calm beneath her. The next few days passed like clockwork. Emily went about her routine, feeding the illusion. But beneath it all, she was orchestrating something precise. Teresa helped her prepare the legal motion. A tech friend helped her install a hidden audio feed in the living room. Emily even cleaned the house top to bottom, not because she cared about the guests, because she wanted the setting of her reckoning to be pristine. Then came Friday. The table was set. Lights were dimmed. Nathan was dressed in his expensive blazer, the one he wore to impress clients. He thought tonight was about status, about image. But he was wrong. "Celeste's running late," Nathan said, checking his phone. "She'll be here in 20. Emily nodded. "That's fine." 10 minutes later, the doorbell rang. It wasn't Celeste. It was Justice Boone. Only Nathan couldn't see him. Emily did. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. His presence was grounding, like a weight that kept her tethered to herself. Celeste arrived in a flash of perfume and silk. She greeted Nathan with a kiss that Emily had to steel herself not to react to. Then they entered the living room, where Emily had set up wine, music, and a laptop resting innocently on the table. Nathan raised a brow. "What's this?" Emily poured herself a glass of wine. Water, actually, and sat. "I just wanted to show you both something before dinner," she said. She clicked play. What followed was 20 minutes of recorded conversations, screenshots, and voice memos, all projected onto the TV screen via her laptop. Nathan went pale. Celeste's smile froze in place. Emily said nothing during the playback. She didn't look at them. She watched the screen, as if it were a story about strangers. In some ways it was. When it ended, she turned to them. "You can leave now," she said to Celeste. Celeste glanced at Nathan. "You told me she was leave," Emily repeated. Celeste didn't argue. She grabbed her purse and walked out. Emily turned to Nathan, who sat frozen. "You really think this is the way to handle things?" he asked, his voice laced with that old condescension she used to confuse with authority. She stood, walking slowly, toward him. "This isn't about handling you," she said. "It's about reclaiming me." He tried to stand, but she placed her hand on his chest. "Sit," she said. He did. "I've spoken to a lawyer. Everything's in motion. You'll receive the paperwork Monday. You'll be stripped of the narrative you've created, and you'll learn something you never understood. Actions have consequences." Nathan scoffed. "You're overreacting." She leaned in. "No, Nathan. I'm remembering who the hell I am." He said nothing. Justice Boone tipped his hat and walked to the door, fading into the shadows beyond. Emily followed him silently to the porch, where she watched the stars begin to form above the trees. She touched the locket hanging from her neck. Inside, Nathan sat in silence, powerless. Emily didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just breathed, deep, steady, complete. Because for the first time in her life, she wasn't someone's wife. She wasn't someone's second option. She was herself. And she was free. The evening air was unnervingly still. It was the kind of quiet that pressed against the skin. A silence that didn't feel peaceful. It felt deliberate, like the world had momentarily held its breath in anticipation of something inevitable. Emily Hartman stood in the kitchen of the house she had once dreamed of growing old in, the light from the chandelier casting long shadows across the room. Everything was ready. The table was set, the wine poured, the camera positioned discreetly on the bookshelf, its lens catching the entire living room in view. She had staged the setting with precision, not out of vanity, but because she knew that the right setting could turn a confrontation into something unforgettable. Nathan would arrive soon, and tonight wasn't just another exposure. Tonight was a performance, a reckoning choreographed not out of spite, but necessity. For days, Emily had rehearsed this moment in her mind. Not the words, those would come naturally, but the presence. She wouldn't scream, she wouldn't cry, she wouldn't beg. She had already done enough of that in her marriage. Tonight, she would speak with clarity, hold her ground with the kind of calm that unsettles people because it signals power. And above all, she would not let him rewrite this moment into another page of his twisted narrative. The door creaked open. She didn't move. "Emily?" Nathan's voice was casual, like he was coming home from the gym, not the arms of another woman. "In here," she called out. He stepped into the room, his suit jacket slung over his shoulder, the smell of expensive cologne announcing him before his voice did. He looked at the table, eyebrows rising. "What's all this?" She turned from the stove, wiping her hands on a cloth. Dinner, a conversation, closure. Nathan smirked, misinterpreting the softness in her voice as invitation. "You're full of surprises this week." Emily met his gaze and said nothing. They sat. The food steamed between them untouched. He poured himself wine. She let hers sit. "So," he began, "I've been thinking. About us." Her heart didn't race. That part of her had quieted long ago. "I think we've both made mistakes," he continued. "There's been distance, miscommunication. I know. I should have handled things differently with Celeste. But I also think you don't get to offer terms anymore," she interrupted, her voice low but unwavering. "You've spent months, maybe years, eroding this marriage, justifying betrayal with fabricated narratives of neglect. You don't get to sit here now and play diplomat." He blinked. The smile faltered. "Emily, I'm trying to fix things." "No," she said. "You're trying to soften your fall. There's a difference." He leaned back, suddenly on alert. "What is this?" She gestured around. "This is the last dinner we'll ever share, and it's being recorded, in case you decide to rewrite it later." His eyes darted to the bookshelf. "You're recording me?" "I'm protecting myself." A long pause. Then, like he always did when cornered, he shifted gears. "You've always been dramatic," he said, swirling his wine. "This is just another performance." Emily leaned in slightly, locking eyes with him. "Do you remember our wedding day? Do you remember what you said to me before the ceremony?" Nathan shrugged. "You said, 'No matter what happens, I'll never embarrass you. I'll never humiliate you in front of the world.'" He looked away. "You didn't just humiliate me, Nathan. You dismantled me. Slowly, quietly. You turned me into a version of myself that was smaller, quieter, more agreeable. Because somewhere along the way, I believed that love was something I had to earn from you. And now, you want to convince me that I should mourn the loss of this marriage? No. What I'm mourning is the woman I used to be." Silence stretched between them. Nathan reached for his wine again. "You're being cruel." "No," she said. "I'm being honest. You just haven't heard that from me in a long time." At that moment, the front door opened again. Footsteps. Celeste entered, dressed like someone who thought she was walking into a social affair, not a reckoning. She paused in the entryway when she saw Emily. "Oh, I didn't realize you were still here." Emily stood. "Why wouldn't I be? This is still my house." Celeste looked at Nathan, confused. "What's going on?" Nathan stood too, the mask finally slipping. "Emily, come on. Let's not do this in front of— We're going to do this exactly here," Emily said. "Because this is what you wanted, isn't it? For me to watch you replace me. For me to see how easily you move on, how disposable I've become." "Emily," Celeste started. "You don't understand." Emily held up a hand. "I understand more than either of you think." She walked toward the fireplace, retrieving an envelope from the mantel. "These are divorce papers, already filed. You'll find the terms very clear. I suggest you read them carefully." Nathan's voice sharpened. "You can't just throw this at me like some ambush." "This isn't an ambush," she said. "It's a release." She walked to the front door and opened it. "You can both leave now." Celeste hesitated. "You're serious?" Emily nodded. "You don't get to win here. Not in this house. Not in my story." Nathan's jaw clenched. He looked at Emily for a long time, as if trying to summon the right words. But whatever he might have said, it would be too little and far too late. They left. Emily closed the door behind them, then locked it. For a long while, she stood there in the silence, the kind that followed an emotional storm. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from release. She walked to the living room, shut off the camera, and turned off the lights one by one. Then she poured herself the wine she hadn't touched all night and sat on the porch beneath the stars. That's when she felt it, his presence. Justice Boone stood by the edge of the yard, under the moonlight. She wasn't startled. He didn't move. He simply watched her with the gaze of someone who had witnessed hundreds of reckonings. Emily stood and walked toward him, glass in hand. "It's done," she said. Justice nodded. "You remembered who you were." "I thought I wanted revenge," she said quietly. "But it turns out I just wanted peace." He tipped his hat. "That's the deeper kind of justice, not what you do to them, what you restore in yourself." Tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the sudden weightlessness she felt. "I don't know what comes next," she whispered. "Then you're exactly where you should be," he replied. He turned and walked toward the woods, fading into the tree line like a myth. Emily stood there for a long time, until the wind picked up and rustled the leaves above her. She looked up into the Wyoming sky. Stars spread out like promises not yet made. Inside, the house was quiet. The kind of quiet that wasn't empty, but sacred. She knew the rest wouldn't be easy. There would be paperwork, questions, maybe even threats. But the hardest part was over. She had stood in front of the man who tried to erase her, and she had refused to disappear. Now, she could begin again. But not as a wife, not as a victim, as Emily Hartman. And that would be more than enough. The weeks after the final confrontation passed in a kind of sacred silence for Emily Hartman. Not the hollow kind that filled her home during the last months of her marriage, but a different silence. Purposeful, grounding, full of space to breathe. The house no longer echoed with the footsteps of deceit. It was hers again. Every room she entered, every chair she touched, every window she opened to let in the Wyoming air reminded her. She had reclaimed herself. Divorce papers had been delivered. Her attorney, Teresa Grant, called it a clean break, though Emily knew there was no such thing when a heart had been involved. Nathan hadn't contested the terms, perhaps because he knew the fight was over, or perhaps because somewhere inside him, even he recognized what he had lost. Emily didn't look back. Instead, she looked west. A few miles outside Jackson Hole sat, a stretch of land that most people passed without noticing. 20 wooded acres with a 2-story ranch house and a small, crumbling corral. It had been on the market for months, overlooked by those who didn't see its potential. But when Emily stood on its porch, wind brushing her hair back, she saw everything. She bought it within the week. The first few days were quiet. No contractors, no renovation plans. She spent them cleaning with her sleeves rolled, putting her hands on the wood, the earth, the history. She found a box of old photographs left behind in the attic. A family she didn't know, captured in black and white, smiles and Sunday clothes. She didn't throw them away. She framed them and put them on the mantel, as if to say, "Your story mattered too." Emily spent her mornings walking the perimeter of the land, learning its rhythms, the crack of branches, the sudden flutter of deer, the way the light spilled over the ridge at dawn. Nature was not gentle, but it was honest. And after all she'd endured, honesty felt like a kind of love. The isolation wasn't loneliness. It was restoration. For the first time in years, she wasn't performing. There were no roles to play, no expectations to meet. She could simply be. But humans are creatures of connection, and healing rarely stays still. It was at the Wrangler, a local bar known more for its saddle decor than its whiskey, where she met Daniel. He was standing at the far end, nursing a glass of bourbon, his jeans worn and his boots muddy in a way that said he actually used them. He wasn't loud. He wasn't dressed to impress. But when he looked at her, really looked, Emily felt something she hadn't in a long time. Curiosity, without pressure. He glanced at the cigarette case she placed beside her glass, the silver one with initials too old to trace. "That's an interesting piece," he said. "Mind if I take a look?" She slid it toward him. He turned it over in his hands, reading the engraving with quiet reverence. "E.H.," he said. "Looks like it's found its way home." Emily smiled. "Maybe. It always was." Daniel returned the case, then extended a hand. "Daniel Wells. I'm a vet. Work with horses, mostly. Some dogs, a few stubborn goats." "Emily Hartman," she replied. "New in town." They talked. Not long. Just enough to feel the edge of something real. He didn't ask what brought her here, and she didn't offer it. That was the first thing she liked about him. The second thing was his laugh. Unforced, like it came from a place that had nothing to prove. A few weeks later, she visited his clinic with questions about horse care. Not because she owned one yet, but because she wanted to. Daniel introduced her to Ringo, a tall chestnut with intelligent eyes and a calm disposition. Emily spent the morning brushing his coat under Daniel's watchful eye, learning about tack, feed, routine. It felt oddly intimate, the act of learning something so new with someone so at ease. The next morning she returned, and the next. By the fourth visit, she was no longer just learning about horses. She was learning to trust again, not quickly, not foolishly, but fully, like someone who had learned the cost of loving the wrong person and now wanted to learn what it meant to love the right way. She didn't fall for Daniel because he was perfect. She fell for the way he listened, the way he said her name, the way he didn't flinch when she shared pieces of her past. On a rainy Friday evening, he stood on her porch holding a bottle of wine and a smile that disarmed her defenses. "Mind a visitor?" he asked. She stepped aside. "Not at all." Dinner was simple. Laughter came easy. Later, lying in bed with her head on his chest, she whispered something she hadn't dared say aloud in years. "I don't want to lose myself in someone again." Daniel brushed a hand down her back. "Then don't. I don't need all of you. I just want what you're willing to share." She closed her eyes, and for the first time, sharing didn't feel like surrender. It felt like agency. The seasons shifted. Snow melted. The corral on her property was restored. With Daniel's help, she adopted Ringo. Her days became a mix of mornings on horseback, afternoons writing in the leather journal Justice once gave her, and evenings spent under the stars with the man who had shown her that love could be quiet and sacred. Justice didn't appear again in the flesh, but his presence never left. Sometimes, when she lit one of the hand-rolled cigarettes he'd given her, ones that never seemed to run out, she felt a kind of energy in the wind. Not haunting, just watching, like a grandfather proud of what had grown from ruin. Emily started a mentorship program for women recovering from betrayal, using part of her property as a retreat space. It wasn't big, just 3 weekends a year, but it was enough. Enough to witness healing in others. Enough to give meaning to her own. On the 1-year anniversary of the night she closed the door on Nathan Hartman, she opened a new one. Daniel proposed in the pasture, Ringo watching nearby like a quiet chaperone. She didn't answer immediately, not out of doubt, but out of reverence, for what had come before, for what she had become. Later that night, in the quiet of their shared home, she said, yes. Not because she needed someone, but because she had become someone. A few days before the wedding, she opened the drawer where she kept the silver cigarette case. Tucked inside was a note she'd never noticed. Folded neatly, written in script that felt both foreign and familiar. It read, "To E.H., when you're no longer surviving, you'll remember what it means to live. Tell her hello for me. J.B." She smiled, closed the case, and looked up into the sky. No one ever really vanishes. They become part of the story that makes us whole. And Emily Hartman? She was finally whole. Emily Hartman's story is not just about betrayal. It's about becoming. What began as a quiet unraveling inside a Jackson Hole bar evolved into a personal revolution that tore down everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and identity. For years, she had lived in the illusion of stability, wrapped in a marriage that looked whole on the outside, but was rotting at its core. Nathan, her husband, didn't just cheat on her physically. He cheated her out of her dignity, her sense of self, and her voice. And like so many people who discover infidelity, Emily was faced with a terrifying truth. Sometimes the person you trust most is the one who dismantles you. But this story wasn't about remaining broken. It was about what Emily did next. She didn't react out of rage. She didn't burn down her life impulsively. She paused. She observed. And most importantly, she reclaimed control, not by punishing Nathan in the way he expected, but by reminding herself who she was before the world told her to be small. With the guidance of a mysterious, mythic stranger named Justice Boone, who may have been a man, or a symbol, or even something ancestral, she built a reckoning not out of vengeance, but truth. She gathered evidence. She found strength. And she confronted her husband in a moment so powerfully composed, it forced him to finally see her, not as a victim, but as the unshakable woman she had always been. Her journey didn't end when the door closed on Nathan. That was merely the threshold of a new life. She didn't just rebuild, she redefined. Buying land in the Wyoming countryside, adopting a horse, learning new skills, starting a mentorship program for women, these were not just actions. They were declarations. Each one said, "I am more than what was done to me. I am more than survival. I am transformation." And along the way, love found her. Not because she needed to be saved, but because she had become the kind of woman who attracted authenticity. Daniel wasn't a fairy tale prince. He was a steady, kind, grounded man who loved her not for what she could do for him, but for who she was, completely. Their love story didn't erase the pain of the past. It honored it, then gently moved forward. Emily's life is a reminder that endings, no matter how brutal, are not the end of us. They are, in fact, the raw material from which we shape our next chapter. Her decision to confront Nathan with calm instead of chaos, to choose healing instead of bitterness, and to move toward purpose instead of pain, is a blueprint for anyone who's ever been betrayed. So, what is the real lesson in Emily Hartman's journey? It's this. When your world falls apart, you are being invited to build something far more honest. Betrayal will find many of us at some point, through lovers, friends, or even ourselves. But how we respond defines everything. We can spiral, or we can steady ourselves. We can shrink, or we can expand. And like Emily, we can choose not to be consumed by what hurt us, but to be reborn because of it. The tools Emily used, silence, patience, planning, self-respect, truth, aren't just tools for revenge. They are tools for restoration, and anyone, in any season of life, can reach for them. Whether you're facing heartbreak, abandonment, or your own inner doubts, you have the same potential to rewrite your story on your terms. Apply her lesson today. If something in your life is no longer honoring who you are, pause, reflect, then act, not from emotion, but from self-worth. That's how you transform pain into purpose. Now let's hear from you. If you had to choose one path forward after betrayal, which would you take? A. Seek closure through conversation and forgiveness. B. Seek peace through separation and personal growth. Drop your answer in the comments. Just type A or B and tell us why you chose it. What's your perspective on Emily's journey? What would you have done differently? Or what part of her story resonated with you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments so others can learn from your experience too. And if you found this story powerful or healing in any way, please subscribe to our channel. Your support fuels the next story, the next transformation, and the next chance to connect through the deepest parts of the human experience.